may I present Rebecca Breithaupt, producer at large.
Nice to meet you. Hi.
Okay, first, before we dive into it too deeply, well, tell me what you do and all the aspects of what you do. What do you do? And then I'll ask my question.
It depends on what time of day it is. So, my day job, I'm an advertising producer. I work on a lot of digital content for a variety of brands, primarily Microsoft. So that's my day job. And I do also produce independent documentaries. And I also produce an independent documentary podcast. It started in the documentary space, and now it's morphed into a podcast. Yeah, so I do that.
Okay, my question was going to be, help us. Let's have a talk first about the job title, producer.
Mm-hmm.
And there are so many different kinds.
Yeah.
And even so many different kinds within each field in entertainment.
Yeah. So, the term is nuanced. Within there's the scope of entertainment. Obviously, what I do as an advertising producer is slightly different from what I do as a documentary film producer, but they all kind of go back to the same skill set, right? I was thinking about this today. I think the easiest way to describe what I do is I manage the project. So in terms of, my day-to-day job as an advertising producer, I'm overseeing the project from start to finish. So while I don't do the creative, I work with the creative team to get them everything they need. I work on the budget, I do the schedule, sourcing crew, location, whatever it needs, and helping them achieve their creative vision. And I see that through on into editorial and finishing and delivery.
Which is similar to what you would do if you were a producer on a movie or a project of some other sort.
I've found that in my side projects working in the film space, I tend to be a little more involved with the creative, but that's personal preference, I think. And just like the nature of that form of the business. So it does it's very similar from job to job, but it is a little nuanced depending on what producer hat I'm wearing. So advertising producer versus film producer versus podcast producer, short film producer, whatever the case may be.
And how does that differ from, like, how many other kinds of producers in when you're working on things, whether it be documentaries or podcast or advertising, that you would have like a line producer and an executive producer, those kinds?
So again, it depends on the project. So when I'm doing commercials, I'm the senior producer, which can dabble into line producing, on-set producer, editorial and post-producer, finishing, delivering producer. But in terms of the film world, I think one of the misconceptions is there's a bunch of different types of producers, right? And it's not even so much that they're doing different things, they're just at different levels. So you have associate producer, you have a producer, you have a co-producer, you have an executive producer. And it kind of just depends on what I've been asked to do and my level of involvement in terms of what that looks like on other projects.
Do you find?
Go ahead.
Well, no, what you were going to say, and then I'll ask.
So, for instance, I'm working on a documentary film. I have been for the last 6 years, and on that, I'm a producer. So, there are other producers on my team and we share the same title. And we're all doing the same workload, but it's just producer. On previous projects, I've come on as associate producer, and that was like kind of a starting level. You know, I'm helping the film out, but I'm not a lead producer, or I'm not an executive producer. I'm not contributing to finance. And again, it's nuanced. Like if we were talking about television, an executive producer could be show running it. An executive producer could just be on the studio level that's, you know, writing the checks. It just depends.
Help me understand the hierarchy. Who answers to who if you're one of these producers? Who's in charge? Who's in charge? That's what I want to know.
I would say executive producer are usually in charge. If they're writing in charge, if they're writing the checks, but it could also be the line producer because they're making the budget. They're telling you what you're spending your money on. It could just be a producer. It's funny because the titles do obviously mean something, as titles mean something, but I would say that's like the basic hierarchy, and then you go down from there. Co-producer, associate producer.
May or may not actually have done anything.
That is true. I think it depends on the job and the person. It's kind of been like a running industry joke that you might give an associate producer credit to like your assistant, you know? But at the same time, I've worked with plenty of associate producers and I've been an associate producer. It's all about what you're contributing to the project. It doesn't necessarily dictate your involvement. That's why I'm like, it's nuanced, I guess. But
right. I mean, the only times that I've ever worked as a director for a producer, I just made sure that I knew who I needed to answer to. Mm-hmm. And then beyond that, I didn't care. Yeah. And sometimes that's really fuzzy and you don't really know, you know, I mean, am I answering right? You know, I mean, if I'm, you know, answering to this producer, but then that producer is answering to somebody else and that person wants to do something differently that may or may not be what I want to do at all, I still just have to focus on what the producer is telling me.
For sure. And, you know, that chain of command is put into place. So as a director, you don't have a bunch of people running to your ear saying, do this, do this, do this. So even if the message is coming from the executive producer, or in the advertising world, maybe the client or the creative director or the executive creative director, it's funneled through, you know, the producer that's under them, so to speak. I think in terms of like the creative relationship, I think that's an interesting dynamic too, because for me, like I think of directors and the creative directors as like, they're my partners, you know, there's not a hierarchy there. Sure, there is on the like producerial side, like I manage up to my boss and client and etc. But you know, in my advertising world, when I'm working on a project, I'm partnering with a creative director to help make their vision happen. So I think of it less as like someone is someone's boss and more we're peers. And of course, together we have bosses that we answer to, and a client, of course, but it's a peer working relationship.
Do you both speak to the clients, or does your boss speak to them?
In my case, I speak with the client. Of course, creatives will as well, but the way things are set up, I tend to be the voice to the client, and then by that extension, the voice of the client, especially when we're on set. So when we're on set shooting a commercial, we have a video village set up, as you all know, and if there's notes on the action that's happening or the takes, the client's going to give me that information. I'm going to pass that on to the assistant director, in some cases the director or the creative director. It just helps streamline the information to make sure that both visions are being met.
So it's almost like a translator.
Yeah, a little bit.
So have you ever had an experience where they just weren't, like the client wanted one thing and the creative team wanted something else and it just wasn't happening?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, I think the job of a producer on set is to make everyone happy. So you have to try and find that common ground. And at the end of the day, depending on the shoot, your client's voice needs to be heard above all. It's their product, it's their brand, they're paying for it, you know? But I think that there's ways to find middle ground. But yeah, absolutely. Everyone has, you know, I think one of the strongest suits of a producer is being able to work with a variety of personalities, because everyone that you come into contact is going to want things a different way. I mean, producers are the same way. I like to do things a certain way as far as my managerial style goes, my organization style. And, you know, in terms of creatives and clients, they're just human. So you have to talk, you know, everyone's going to be worked with in their own way that best suits them. Yeah, as a producer on set, sometimes you're a therapist for the creative. You're obviously a friend of the client, and respecting that relationship and making sure that their needs are being met. And you're a problem solver, you're a fixer. I think what I love about producing is the variety, and that as a producer, I feel that I need to be able to do anything. So if a problem comes to me, whether or not I can actually physically fix it, I am the person that's going to find the way to fix it. So if that means I go to X in the props department or in hair and makeup, or I, you know, speak with the director or the creative director, you're going to be the source of how to solve that and bring the people together. That's another main part of my job, is bringing the right team, and whether that's a group of creatives or, you know, crew, bringing everyone together to make sure you're ultimately making the best product and helping create that vision that you either developed over time with your director writer team, or that you sold to your client, and that your client wants to best suit their brand and their product.
So it takes a certain type of personality to do all that. I mean, I think I know you, so I know that you're great at that. But what kind of advice would you give to somebody who, let's say, was going into the field, that they might need to know about just engaging how their personality ought to be, or maybe it's some things they should work on and just know that they're either good at or not good at if they intend to be a producer?
I think it's all about being flexible, you know. Of course, I say I have ways that I like to do things, and that's true of anyone in any career, right? In anything that you do. But you have to have a flexibility, because things change all the time on set, and even leading up to shoots, and then creative, and then on into the editorial process. You know, you have a set vision and you want to achieve that ultimately, but that doesn't mean that things won't ebb and flow getting there, or directions can pivot. So I think having a sense of flexibility and understanding that, like, just trying to be even keel, which inwardly I might be a ball of rage and or tears, but outwardly I'm, you know, you gotta keep it together, because when things screw up, like in any
Give us an example. Give us an example, like a crazy one.
Oh, I'd have to think about it. Give me a minute on that. We'll come back to that.
Okay.
When a client's not happy, or someone's late to set, or whatever, you know, or you're running way over time. I could probably speak to that. That's happened a lot, especially speaking from someone who, like, is trying to watch the budget and the schedule and knows that the crew needs to stop at a certain time, or you're going to go into overages, or people are going to walk. You know, I was working on a project in London, and crews, you know, all over the world just do things differently. Their days are longer or shorter depending on where you're working. regardless of unions. It's just people have different structures in their industries. And we were filming in a rural area in England and just outside of London. And our day was so ambitious. And we said that from the start. This is too much. There's no way we can do this. But you know what? We had to get it. And we had flown there to get it. And we were going to get it. Daylight be damned. And towards the end of the night, it was definitely some conversations of, your crew is going to walk off set if we don't wrap this up soon. And that's understandable. It was a long, I think it was like a, you know, in the States, I feel like I'll say like, oh, it was a 14-hour day. And it's like, oh, short day on set. But, you know, different places do things differently. And that was a really long day. I felt it too. And it was, you know, it was a matter of producers going around and hearing the grievances of the crew, understanding, being very respectful, and trying to come to a compromise in the moment to be like, okay, 1 more hour, 2 more hours, because, you know, as we know, when you finish on set, when you wrap for the night, you're not done. If you're in the crew, you don't get to just like and go away. They still had to pack off all their gear and drive back to wherever they were from. In this case, it was, you know, a couple hours or more. So I realized that wasn't probably as salacious as you wanted to hear, but you know, I still have to represent some confidentiality. But
of course,
it was crazy. Like it was very stressful and a very long day for a crew that worked their butts off and did an amazing job. But those are the kind of things that when that stuff starts to go down and people are going to start looking at you, including your client, hey, I'm hearing rumblings. You got to keep the ship just like steady, even though inside I was like, oh my God, we're going to lose our crew.
Just a quick question for clarification. So you had mentioned, well, who or what roles are clients versus creatives?
Great question. So, you know, again, in my experience, the clients are obviously partners with you developing the idea. A lot of times the creatives will have a brief, and then the creatives will act off of that and present ideas, and then the client will land on one, give us feedback, we'll develop it over time as we go into the production, and they're, you know, a partner. But it does kind of depend on the client as well.
And the creatives are on your crew. They're part of your system.
Exactly. So as an agency, we come with our producerial staff, our creative staff. Sometimes we'll, you know, hire out directors. Sometimes they're internal, and we come to them with ideas and pitch them and work with them to develop them. Now, some clients are less inclined to be involved with that creative. I've been really fortunate that we've had great creative partners who do like to be involved, which is a lot of fun. I think it helps the process. But sometimes it's more, here's our messaging, come back to us, this is what we have to hit. Okay, we'll approve this, we'll approve that. And then in terms of being on set, you know, the creative is traditional as you would assume. Sometimes they're the writers on set sitting in Video Village, and we've brought in a director that's representing the agency, but is sort of independent. Sometimes our creative directors are also the directors. It just kind of depends on the vision and the scope of the project. Sometimes it's timeline, just quite simply. And then on set, our clients are, you know, they're part of that creative process. They're part of that vision, but they're also your client. So you want them to be happy. They're paying for it. And ultimately, like, the buck kind of stops there. If they're not happy with what they're getting, even if you have this vision or your team has this vision, it doesn't matter if they're not, you know, you've got to come to a meeting place. So and that's the difference.
That's how I explained, sometimes in the film world, at least, I don't know how it is in all the other aspects, but I look at being a director as a translator for what the producer or my boss wants.
Mm-hmm.
And it may not be something that I would normally like even.
Absolutely.
You know?
Yeah.
But you know, if I come across something that I thought, oh, I think it would be a mistake to do that, but I'm happy to do what you want,
Mm-hmm.
is usually how I approach it. And
Yeah.
and typically the producers are like, okay, well, wait a minute, tell me why you think it's a mistake, because I that's something I should know. And then you tell them, and then you, whatever they decide, I believe is what, as a director, you should do. You know, I don't know about, I mean, I've heard situations. I had a friend's spouse who directed a studio movie, and was so inundated with executives telling him what to do,
Mm-hmm.
that he freaked out because he couldn't do what he wanted to do. And I just thought, well, that's not your job. I think what I would think your job is to give them what they want, you know?
I tend to agree, but I think also your job is to guide them towards what is the best possible outcome for the product, for the video. And that's all we can do, right? All we can do is make recommendations and explain, you know, gracefully why we think something should be done a certain way, or how it stays more true to the concept, or ultimately will lead to this. But at the end of the day, if that's not what they want, all right, then all we can do is support their vision, and get to the best possible outcome when you deliver the piece.
Okay, I have a question for both of you two then. So, okay, so from like a novice or general public point of view, you know, perhaps there's this misconception of, you know, the creative director that, you know, runs the show, particularly in documentary where there's a creative vision, but it spills into, say, like a Quentin Tarantino who writes it, directs it, and now even produces it. But much of the industry actually is a production company where, you know, they have this idea and it goes through production, particularly like Pixar, and that's far more producer driven. And in that case, probably directors doing what the director is told. But can you kind of, you know, are there in fact like two different viewpoints? And I mean, what was your experience, Steve? And it sounds like you're coming more from the producer driven model, Rebecca.
Well, for me, out of the 17 features that I've directed, I've never made a short film. I've never made a commercial. I mean, I've done some like corporate-ish stuff, you know, some small sort of social video brand commercials for, you know, small clients or friends. But I've never been exposed into that side of the industry. I've only really worked on features. And out of the 17 features that I've directed, I've produced or co-produced all of them except about 3. So most often I'm just doing whatever I want because I have no one else to answer to. Now, there have been some cases where the financier was in charge and made it really, really clear that the buck stopped there. Mm-hmm. And I had to take that person's objective and their desired goals and then use my skills as best I could to give them that. And sometimes, you know, there were, well, you know, I don't like this scene. I think it's poorly written. I think we should rewrite it, or I think we should do this. It's going to be a little stronger. And I would present that. And in some cases, that person agreed. And in some cases, they did not. And they said, well, this is how I want to have it. And thank you for sharing, but this is how I want to have it. And I said, okay, all right, I'll do it. So that's been my personal experience. But what about Rebecca?
I agree with you. I think it really depends on the project. You know, as far as being like more producer led, I don't mean to confuse that. When I say like the producer in the case of like the advertising world is like overseeing it from start to finish, it's less about dictating any sort of creative or the outcome. It's more about knowing the project from start to finish, in terms of budget, in terms of you do know the creative, you do know the goal, you know the client, you know the brand, and you know what they're looking to accomplish in the same way that a creative person does. But my involvement allows the creative to focus on creative and take away the logistical things and budgetorial things that can come into play, so it doesn't pull their focus, if that makes sense.
would you also say that sometimes, you know, the people that come in and out of a project might happen quite frequently, but you're the one that remains the whole time?
Consistent. Yeah, for sure. And, you know, we've definitely worked on projects where we might, well, most certainly, where if it's a bigger shoot, we bring in a director just to direct the shoot, but they don't necessarily go into editorial. Like, they're there to function as you would expect Steve or any director to work. They're on set, and maybe they come on board, you know, a week before the production, and they work, you know, just the production days, and then they're done. And they, of course, are welcome to give input on the edit and everything, but a lot of times they're there just for that element. But I'm going to be on it throughout the rest of the project to maintain that consistency.
Is the creative director or the creative team also there the whole time, or do they just kind of leave at one point or come in at one point?
Usually, in my experience, they're involved the whole time. You know, from briefing and pitching and writing through production and through editorial, because much like I maintain a consistency at a high level, and, you know, schedule and budget and all the, make sure everything gets delivered on a certain time is exactly what it needs to be delivered, specs, etc. They're maintaining that creative consistency throughout. So yes, they're generally from start to finish. And then once we're, you know, literally down to, okay, here's the video, QC it. Okay, great. Now the creative can go off and do another project. As a producer, I'm going to hand it over the finish line. But yeah, it's so important to have that consistency.
Cool. Okay, so I know that you have worked on some projects that have incredible amounts of money, mm-hmm. and projects that have nothing.
Yes.
So in this full spectrum of having no budget to almost endless resources, mm-hmm. have you found a big difference in the basic principles of producing?
No. And the problems are going to be the same. I mean, money does help, obviously, but it also complicates things. You know, when you're doing a small project, and I'm having worked with you before and just knowing you personally, like, I'm such a fan of what you do. You know, I know you have investors and you make things happen that way, but so often you're kind of just doing your own thing and making it happen. And you know that there's that difference in that sort of creative freedom versus if you have a bigger budget. Obviously, there's more, understandably, people, brands, things to adhere to, investors, who then, you know, with the money comes power. They, as you mentioned, you've had executive producers that were like, I paid for this, this is what's going to happen. But like the principles, they're all the same. I mean, and I think that knowing that I do, for myself personally, I'm speaking to like my own journey, knowing that I have produced those bigger budget, you know, things, and done things with friends for zero money, I always like lean into that. It gives me a sense of confidence, because it is going to be the same thing usually every single time. It's just problems in different clothes. You know what I mean?
Yes. Like, yeah.
You're going to have the same conversation. Sure. There's nuances of like, if I'm making a documentary, the process getting from beginning to end is different than if I'm making a commercial, but you're looking to do the same things. You're talking to the same types of people. And you can always lean into that, that's something I love about producing.
Cool. Well, and I was also going to say, you know, I mean, have you found that sometimes having the money and the extra resources, sometimes doesn't, it helps. I mean, sometimes it helps, sometimes it doesn't. The idea that you have to have it isn't necessarily the case, is what I'm asking. Is the misunderstanding like, well, the more money I have, the better it is. The more money I have, the easier it is. The more money I have, you know, solves all the problems. And, oh, if I only had $10 million, I could make this movie really well. And I just don't think that's true. Do you?
I think in the film world, that's not true at all. And the advertising world is a different beast. a budget helps. It just does. But in the film world, I mean, you've proved it 17 times. Like, there's so much that can be accomplished just from hard work and gumption. And I know that sounds a little naive, but it's kind of true. Yes, you need to build your network. Yes, you need to have people that believe in you and want to help you and volunteer their time. And that takes time to get there.
Well, and I say, even if I'm sitting here with $1 million cash,
mm-hmm.
I still have the mindset to try to get the hotel to donate rooms.
Yes.
Like, I don't really want to spend the money on.
You're a natural born producer, Steve.
Yeah, like I would rather get as much sponsor, as much donated, as much deals, as much discount as I can, because then I'm sitting on some extra cash that I could apply other places.
Well, put it on the screen more than anything, right?
Right.
That's the bottom line. Like, how do you put all of that money on the screen? And what can you do as a producer in this case to ensure that as much money as possible is going towards the product, which is why we're all here, Right.
My other sort of question for you is, what led you to do what you do? Like, your life timeline. Like, did you think that you wanted to be a producer one day?
Yes. I decided at 13 that I wanted to be a producer. Did not know what that meant. I just was like, this is what I want to do. And I've just stuck to that. It was a lot of figuring out what exactly that meant. But as a kid growing up who did theater and loved film and made little films and all that stuff, like, starting at a pretty young age on up until like high school and then eventually studying film in college, it's just, I loved certain elements of it and have such a respect for the different elements, but I never wanted to be an actor. I would dabble with directing, but it's not what I want to do. I'm not a writer. I'll say that, not a writer. And yeah, just the more I actually focused in on what being a producer meant to me and got the experiences from a lot of different viewpoints. When we first met, I was a PA working in the grip department on Firecracker. And for, a minute I was like, do I want to be a grip? And I'm like, no, you want to be a producer. But I found these, all these little experiences. It was like getting my general studies degree. You know what I mean? Like, I think it's so important as a producer to know what everyone does on set and not just, okay, I know what the makeup person does, but like have like some experience and some really understanding, because when we go back to what we talked about earlier, where you're dealing with so many different personalities and it is your job to make everyone happy and bring people together, like, it so helps to have that point of view, having worked in a grip department, having been a PA, doing whatever was necessary. And I always encourage people that are just getting started to go that route. Like, don't say no to anything, learn every aspect of it. But that's a long-winded way of saying, yes, I've always wanted to be a producer. I've tried different things. To me, I love creative, but I also, there's creativity to me in logistics and planning and budgets and schedules and bringing people together. And I just know, like, personally, I am really good at meeting people and bringing people together. I actually think it's one of my strongest skills. So yeah, I just always knew.
Cool. Well, and I love what you said about really having the knowledge of each department and each job, sort of, so that when you are on your 14-hour day in London, you know exactly how they feel because you have been there.
Yeah. In Kansas, in like hot weather with Steve. I know what it's like.
Right. What is the strangest, farthest travel job that was just sort of, and was it planned or was it you got to be there in 2 days?
I wouldn't say it was strange, but the farthest I've traveled, about a year ago, I worked on something that shot in India for, it shot for 1 day there, and we spent about 3 days there. And it was a really pretty, it was a big production in that we shot in 3 locations over 10 days around the world. So we started by, and we had, I want to say we had about a month from like briefing, creative concepting, prep, and then actual execution. And then we came back and we had maybe about a month for editorial. So pretty fast turn, but that's pretty commonplace. And like this was for a commercial shoot. So that's nothing unusual, but it was pretty run and gun. And literally we got on a plane to go to India. We knew where we were filming in India. Our team on the ground in California was figuring out where we were going to film in London, which is where we were going next, and where we were going to film in California when we got back, because our various locations had fallen through. And traveling 20 hours, getting sick on a plane, as I always do, with like a cold, because you're sitting on a plane for 20 hours. Arriving in India, like out of my mind, because I hadn't slept and watched 10 movies on a plane. But it was the most incredible experience I've had so far as filming goes. Like, to film, like, it's a gift to film anywhere, period. But to be able to go to different countries and in situations so unlike what you're used to, and see how other crews work and other people work and meet people and just have that life experience was amazing. It's something I'll never forget, but it was insane. And so we were in India for about 3 days, and then we jumped on a plane, went to England, shot there for a day. Meanwhile, we're like getting there, taking phone calls with our partners in the States, trying to figure out where we're filming as soon as we get back. And this was all towards like the end of the year. Filmed in England, got back on a plane, was literally landed in LA, and went home, went to bed, woke up the next morning at 5 a.m. Thankfully, my crew sent me a car because I was delirious, took me to set in like Chino. We filmed, and then I was like, we're done. It was incredible though. It was amazing.
Was there any interesting sort of thing or part of a foreign crew that surprised you as being very, very different that we typically don't have in US crews, whether it be commercial or film?
For sure. Like England feels very similar to the States. Like crews work different hours, but similar vibes. And much like you can usually identify who's who on set, it's pretty easy to do in England. But filming in India, there was a lot of people just hanging around, and I didn't always know who was part of the crew and who wasn't, because you go on a film set in Los Angeles, for example, the grips are going to be dressed like grips. So what's that mean? They're probably going to have a tool belt, t-shirt, shorts, whatever. The producer might be dressed like in a polo or something. The director has a ball cap on. It's true. All directors wear ball caps, except for maybe you. But you can usually.
I'm the only director without a ball cap and black rimmed or framed glasses.
It's true. You're unusual. But yeah, I remember being on set, and even just going on our scout, because we went to scout as soon as we got there, and it's we were insulated a little bit. We had like our fixer and our drivers taking us around, because we didn't know, we were shooting in New Delhi and we didn't know the area, and some parts, just like any country, can be unsafe. But so we're walking around some of these areas, and my mind's blown. I'm like, there's cows everywhere. It's so cool. I want to touch everything. And they're like, don't touch anything. But I'm like, I want to pet all the animals. Don't do that. And I was literally looking around, and I didn't know who my crew was. Like, I knew who my people were that I was there with, but you show up to a scout and you might have your set PA, you're going to have your grip team, you're going to have your assistant director, because we're all there to scout. And I was like, I don't know who anyone is. And that was the difference. Like, because, even when we were filming actually on the day, there were a lot of people just hanging out, like kind of looky-loos. And you get that anywhere. But I just, that was probably the biggest difference to me. I was like, I don't know who anyone is. And I don't want to ask anyone for anything. So I'm just
I always get the looky-loos to either start helping out.
Yeah.
Or okay, you all are going to be extras. Just go over there and just, like you just use them.
It's true, but I was like, I don't know the culture completely. I don't want to offend anyone. I don't know if these people are just hanging out because they want to watch the film shoot. So I was just like, okay. But everyone was super, super friendly and nice. So, but that was the biggest difference. I didn't always know who anyone was outside of my little circle.
Were you adventuresome with the food while you were there?
Yeah. I mean, we had our hosts who were wonderful. We had a producer who came in from another part of India to be a little more of a fixer and our producer on the ground. So she took us to a lot of restaurants that she had vetted and knew. But yeah, I mean, I love Indian food. I was so stoked. Like our hotel's breakfast buffet was amazing. It's having Indian food every morning for breakfast. I probably ate more there than I did in England.
Well, that's. I mean, there's good food now in England, but for quite a while, that wasn't the case.
Yeah.
All right, in a little bit, we have about 15 minutes left. I was going to open it up for a Q&A, but before we do that, I want to thank you for coming on with us today. And then
Pleasure.
I still am trying to figure out. I mean, even though I've kind of familiarized myself with what all the producing roles in the film world mean, when I start thinking about it in the commercial industry or even the music industry, it's completely different. And so it's just, I think that when people are starting out and they're just beginning to unroll in their experience in entertainment, I wanted to have this talk with you to help sort of figure out for them how to differentiate what exactly it means to be a producer in this way or that way, or this type of producer or something like that. And I think we pretty much covered it all. Does anybody have any question about the clarity of sort of the types of producers and what it is that is different about the film world versus the commercial world or any other thing?
I had a question, Steve.
Yeah.
For Rebecca, what's the difference like between a line producer versus the other, executive producer?
Sure. So it can vary, of course, as they all can, depending on the actual industry that you're in. But line producer tends to do the budget and help source the crew. Line producers I've worked with also would help us find locations and sometimes with casting. I mean, they're even more logistical based, I would say, than the stuff that I do as far as owning the budget. But not all shoots get a line producer. So typically in my day-to-day job, when we have a line producer, it's a way bigger production. And I will build out a budget for the creative side as far as the creative director's time, if there's copywriters, the editorial staff, the producer staff on the agency side. And then the line producer will come in that case, and budget out locations, actual crew. They might do the casting costs, and they roll that into a separate budget. So it's a lot of budget.
And sometimes, sometimes as I've experienced it, I've had a few line producers on movies, but some of them have often been sort of production managers or production supervisors.
Yeah, for sure.
Who do the same thing, and they could quite well take the credit line producer, but they took the credit production manager. Or
tends to be a little more focused on the physical production than like the holistic whole part of the production, like more laser focused on the physical production, I would say, like the shoot.
what would you say the general manager of a restaurant is? Are they a producer, or are they sort of like a line producer? I like to make everything about food at the end.
I think they're a producer. But you know, while I don't identify as a line producer, there are times when I'm functioning as a line producer. Does that make sense? Like,
yeah.
if I don't have, for example, a lot of times we'll do projects that are based on an existing video game. So we need to do game capture. We need to do editorial. We need to do a creative component, obviously, to enable to do all those other things I just said. But there's not a live action shoot. So we're not going to bring in a line producer to budget that. I'm going to budget that. So in that case, I'm functioning as a line producer, you know, in a way.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Kim, did that make sense for you?
Yeah, it did. Thank you.
Cool. Okay, I would love to just take any question anybody has for Rebecca here in the last bit.
Rebecca, do you run into a situation where their desire is bigger than their budget and have to deal with that?
Every day.
Okay. So how do you address that diplomatically? Because it seems like a lot of times you go, you know, I really want the Titanic, and you can handle a tugboat maybe. So how do you deal with that with a client?
You know, it's hard. A lot of times too, we're dealing more with the creative to manage that expectation. And then we're able to present it to the client and hopefully get them excited too. But I think, you know, you just got to think of it, and it's hard. I'm going to make this sound like it's easy. It's not easy. It's one of the hardest things I do. I think you just have to really think about it like a partnership, and how do we best realize their vision? So is that I'm calling, hopefully not, but maybe I'm calling in some favors to see if we can get the art direction at a certain, you know, price point, or sometimes you just have to draw the line in the sand. I mean, I joke about it all the time on calls, but I'm like, I will say, okay, I'm sorry, I have to be the bad cop. I have to put on my producer hat. I want you to have this, but we really just can't afford it. And
Right.
sometimes you just have to be honest. But it is my job to do everything possible to try and realize that vision. And sometimes you do run into roadblocks, as creative as you can be with money.
Well, and I found sometimes, you know, you can, on one day, you might go out back and you get the Titanic for nothing, you know, and you're like, what do I use this? You know, how do I take advantage of this? And then, you know, next week you try to get the tugboat and you can't get it. You know, it's like.
And the doors are all closed. Yeah, exactly. You just take it case by case. It is something I deal with constantly though. And I totally get it. Like, we always want the best. That's human nature. And especially when it's your creative, like, how could you ever, I guess you gotta think of it in terms of like, it's not making it less, it's just trying to figure out how to make it work, you know, because we all want the best thing.
Well, and that's, I think, a really fun, challenging part is, okay, you know, we can't afford to do this, but how are all the other ways we could approach the same thing and share the same thing in a similar way that we can't afford, you know?
I can't get you the Taj Mahal, but I can get you this location, and let's talk about how we can make this work and how it can still realize your vision.
Right. That's cool.
Yeah.
Anybody else have anything for Rebecca? Nobody? All right then. Rebecca, thank you for talking with us today and for being here, and we hope to see you again soon.
Me too. Thanks so much.
Where can people find out more about you if they're interested?
That's a good question. Well, one of my projects that I'm very proud of is my podcast that I mentioned, and it's called Straight White Guy Listening. And you can go to swlistening.com to hear episodes. We're also on anywhere that you find podcasts. Big fan of that. And you can find me on Instagram.
Cool. Well, we'll look for the podcast. It's a fantastic podcast, so I strongly encourage everybody to check it out.
One other thing I would be remiss if I didn't bring it up. Dark Side of the Mountain is the documentary film I've been working on for the last 6 years with an amazing group of creatives. It's from director Eric Walter, who did My Amityville Horror, which was actually the first documentary film I worked on. Check us out, darksidedoc.com. Hopefully that'll be out this year.
Cool. Well, thank you again. Have a wonderful rest of your weekend, and everybody else stay safe and be good.
Thank you.
You too. Thank you.